I'm a teacher in Minnesota. I'm doing this very low tech. I'm just wanting to point out a few things that I see, consequently do something like an apologia for Christianity. And so at last we come to religion. What do we mean by religion and religious experience? I like to make the distinction between religion and spirituality. Spirituality is what every human being experiences, because we all have a spirit, a consciousness, an id and ego, whatever we want to define it as, which experiences the world. And in trying to discover who we are as individuals, we go through a series of spiritual experiences, reflections on ourselves, knowing ourselves in the world as a collective entity and as an individual. Religion is the outward expression or attempt to reinforce those ideas in us. Religion is an outward manifestation of an inward experience, or it is the outward and visible sign of an interior and invisible reality. Religions, therefore, are attempts to, by signs and symbols, mythology if you will, an attempt to reinforce and to further examine the experience of what it means to be a human being. And we subscribe to a religion as a way of subscribing to the reinforcement of the reality that we accept about what we are as human beings. I don't think that either people who believe or people who don't believe have actually asked the questions that are necessary. What do we mean by belief or disbelief? What do we mean by God? What do we mean by sacraments? What do we mean by Christ? What do we mean by the soul? If we were to honestly ask these questions, we wouldn't really have time anymore to criticize the other camp for this, that, or the other thing. We wouldn't have time to point out that another person is living a completely immoral life, or that they are living a moral life, for that matter. We wouldn't have the time to do so. We'd be so engaged in trying to figure out what we were in the universe that we wouldn't have time to be able to do these things. And yet, ironically and simultaneously, we'd have all the time in the world. The religious experience, then, is a way of reinforcing these beliefs that we have come to accept, that we have willed ourselves to give credence to. And the question that we have to ask then is, to what do I give my allegiance, my credence? What do I really accept, or what do I really profess is the experience of being a human being? And if we give credence to one thing, it's going to make a very big difference than if we give credence to another thing. We have to ask ourselves the question of what form of imagery are we going to use to express what it means to be alive. Consequently, we could look at the religion as a literal level. That's a possibility. But at the same time, we have to express that these things have other meanings to them. And those meanings need to be explored if we're really going to figure out what it means to be human, and not simply just be automatons in the universe, acting out of a sense of a slavish sense of duty or fear or obedience or what have you. We need to go through this interior examination and this questioning of what it means to be alive. And what we discover when we really approach this question with an honest spirit is that this experience takes on a threefold dimension. The dimension of the adept, and of the novice, and of the adept, and of the master. That threefold experience is an experience of the divine, whatever that is. And the only way to talk about it is through mythology, through images. It is the story then of Dante. It's the story of going through hell, purgatory, and heaven. It is the experience of Beowulf experiencing Grendel. Grendel's down the dragon. It is the experience of the Christian, for instance, going through hell, purgatory, and heaven, as Dante says. It is the experience of dealing with the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. It is the experience, I would add, of Goldilocks and the Three Bears. And so I end with a child's story, as I began with a child's story of Red Riding Hood. My father, right before he died, had a very interesting experience. All his life he had questioned these things and examined these things and wondered about these things. And at the end of his life he said, I no longer question. I accept, as a child would accept, that these things are real. And that was a beautiful moment, I think, because he had reached this level of the master, seeing the Maya of the world, and yet going back to a childlike realization of these things are true. In order to be born again, you must become a child. And that's the religious experience in its best form. We as humans have a tendency to concretize our myths, I say, and look at them only on the literal level. And one is certainly open to do so. The Catechism says that you can certainly look at these things on the literal level, but you also need to look at them on other levels as well, if you're going to go through the experience of understanding what it means to be human. Our religious practice is simply a way of reinforcing these things in an outward way, and that's why getting it right in our words, getting it right in our music, and in our drama, and in our painting, and in our sculpture, and in our architecture is so vital to confirming what we mean on the basic levels. If, for instance, we are to go through this experience, we have to face Grendel. We have to face Grendel's dam, and we have to face the dragon. If we don't face them, we end up like Goldilocks. Goldilocks, who's this golden-haired little cherub of a child, comes into this realm of chaos in the forest that is dominated by a Trinitarian image, three spirits or powers. And she goes in blindly as though these things are due to her, as though somehow, just by having a room temperature of 98.6 and having a pulse, these things are what she should inherit. And when she meets them face to face, when she wakes up from a spiritual sleep, she sees something so terrifying that she jumps out the window and flees and never goes back there again. And that image is a powerful image, because I think every human being goes through this same thing. When we're children, everything's fine. It's beautiful, wonderful. Mom and Dad know what they're doing. God's in his right place. There's a Santa Claus and a tooth fairy, and it's all good. As we grow older, we think, oh, something's afoot. Mom and Dad aren't necessarily right all the time. Maybe Santa Claus doesn't exist. As we become adults, we say, well, these things are a reality, but I know that I am prone to excesses and to misery, and the world's a miserable place.